Today I'll be sharing my thoughts on the first 3 episodes of the new Wheel of Time TV series. I'll be breaking up the review into 3 parts. Firstly, the setting, so everything from landscapes to costumes. Secondly, the plot, in particular the individual character arcs and how that's varying from the books. And finally, since this is ostensibly a music YouTube channel, I'll be spending quite a bit of time talking about the music in the TV show. So there will be no book spoilers except for one very small spoiler that I'll give warning of in advance. But there will obviously be spoilers from episodes 1 to 3 of the show, since that's what I'll be talking about. So to begin with the setting, I think they did a really good job here. The costumes were great. The landscapes were really gorgeous, reminded me a lot of the Lord of the Rings movies. And places such as Aridhol or Shadalagoth, I think they really captured as well, and everything was looking really good. And looking at how they portrayed different groups, I actually disagree with a lot of the critiques I've seen online about starting the show with the Red Arger. I think this was a really good scene. It showed the predatory nature of this organization and also the misandry that's fairly prevalent in the Red Arger. Moving on to the Trollocs, I think again they did a really good job of capturing the character of these creatures. So they're often described in the books as human features buried in animalistic features, and often they mention the eyes of the Trollocs being human but the rest of the face looking very animal, and I think they really captured that here. You can see the bright blue eyes on this Trolloc. And then the white cloaks look like a bunch of creepy altar boys. Perfect. They did a really good job of bringing those groups to life in a kind of disconcerting way that's going to make it clear that they're sort of the enemy groups throughout much of the book. So overall, I think they've done a really great job with the setting and with bringing the book to life visually. So I'm going to give the setting a 10 out of 10. I think it would have been fairly hard to do much better with bringing these groups and these places to life on the screen. So moving now to the plot, as I said, I'm going to address the plot in terms of character arcs with the 5 main characters. So Moiraine and Lan, I think, have been shown pretty much identical to the books. They've both been played really well by their actors, and very happy with those 2 characters. So moving to the other 5, the 2 Rivers characters, starting with Nynaeve. So I think the show's done a really good job of making these female characters more relevant in the early parts than they are in the books. Jordan's kind of notoriously bad at writing female characters, and I think the show has really brought these female leads out. The one issue I have with Nynaeve's story is the introduction of a classist White Tower. So she tells this story about her mentor who was poor and walked to the White Tower and got turned away because she looked too poor. This is, to me, kind of a tropey thing, which is totally anathema to the actual concept of the White Tower in the books. So the White Tower's in the books one of the few places in Jordan's world where class really has no effect. It's actually basically written off. As soon as you join the White Tower, everyone's on an equal footing as novices, and class has nothing to do with it. And this is very obvious in the fact that the current Amelin seat at the time of the Wheel of Time books is a fisherman's daughter. And so I'm not sure how they're going to kind of resolve this supposed classism with the fact that the Amelin is a fisherman's daughter. I think it was a kind of throwaway line that didn't need to be there. But talking about Nynaeve specifically, I think they've done a really good job of introducing the strong character that we eventually get to know in the books. It takes a while in the book, but we're seeing it already from the start of the show. She's killing Trollocs with daggers, she's ambushing warders in the middle of a forest. So yeah, I think Nynaeve's character is definitely benefiting from the way she's being portrayed in the show. So I say that this is a big improvement in her character arc. There are some very minor spoilers coming here, so if you don't want to hear anything that hasn't already been revealed in the show, skip ahead to the Rand section. So moving on to the next character, Egwene. I think Egwene is also benefiting from more of a focus in the TV series than she gets in the beginning of the books. And this is centered around one major change which we heard at the very opening of the TV series. And that's this concept that they don't know if the dragon will be a girl or a boy. So I can see why they've done this. It allows them to very easily make Egwene much more relevant in the early part of the story. And it also actually gives a better justification of why she travels with the group in the first place when they leave Emond's Field. But I want to briefly examine this claim and see if it really is viable that the characters in the show wouldn't actually know if the dragon was going to be reborn as a boy or a girl. And I think that the answer there is no, it's not really a viable claim. So this is because of the Karaethon cycle, which are the prophecies of the dragon in the Wheel of Time world. It's basically everything that the people in the modern world know about what's going to happen with the dragon reborn. So we're going to ignore for a moment the fact that the prophecies refer to the dragon reborn as he dozens of times. We can maybe put that down to an error in translation or a misogynist scribe. But I think there is one line that really betrays that the dragon reborn is not going to be female, and that's this one. That something important isn't going to happen till Kalendor is wielded by the dragon's hand. So what is Kalendor? Well, Kalendor is this shining sword that you see in the background. It's the literal sword in the stone in the Wheel of Time world. And it is a Sangreal used for channeling the male half of the source, Saidin. So, yeah, it becomes pretty apparent from the fact that the dragon's going to be wielding Kalendor that the dragon couldn't possibly be a woman in this world, since Kalendor can only be used by a man. So these facts about Kalendor and the prophecies are something that would be known to all Aes Sedai because they are taught in this as part of their training, taught the history of the world and the prophecies, and particularly would be known to Moiraine, as she also received the education of a noblewoman even before moving to the White Tower. In addition to this, Moiraine was one of two people in the current world who actually heard the foretelling that the dragon had been reborn. And this wasn't by a woman with eyes so white that she was blind. This is a kind of bad trope that sounds like it's come from a B-grade Dungeons & Dragons campaign. You don't need to be blind to have foretelling in the Wheel of Time universe. This idea that blind people see the future isn't one that exists in this world, and it's going to be shown to not exist when this foretelling becomes relevant to some of the other current non-blind characters. But the fact that Moiraine has heard this foretelling, she knows that the foretelling was that the dragon has been reborn and he takes his first breaths on the slope of Dragon Mount. So Moiraine would know for sure at this point that the dragon reborn is not a female. I can see why they did this to make the female characters more relevant, but I don't think it's something that we really want to see maintained through the series, and I hope that once it's served the purpose of bringing these female characters to the fore, they're going to kind of forget about it and not try and rewrite the rest of the story around this possibility that the dragon could have been female, because I think that's going to be detrimental in the long run. But in terms of how this has specifically affected the storytelling in terms of Egwene's character arc, I think this is much better. She's a more relevant character. We're getting to see her as a strong character to begin with, getting to relate to the character much more. So I think this is an improvement in her character arc, even though there's some kind of questionable background to it. So moving on to Rand, I think Rand's story in the show can be summarized in one symbol, and that is a giant question mark. So we basically know nothing at all about Rand at this point. They haven't explored much really about his background, about his family relationships. We've seen very little about his relationship with Tam, his father, which is a very important part of the early chapters of the book. And basically at this point in the show, he's being cast as just a love interest for Egwene. I can see kind of why they're doing this in order to get the plot moving forward as quickly as possible. They didn't want to linger too long in Emond's Field, going into family relationships of the characters there, but I'm hoping that they're going to address this with maybe some flashbacks or something along those lines in later episodes, because I think the character development of these characters, particularly Rand, Mat and Perrin, is really important to the overall storyline, and if they skip out on this, it's going to end up awful, like the final seasons of Game of Thrones. So yeah, Rand, his character arc definitely worse at this point. Hope it's going to get fixed throughout the next few episodes in season 1. So moving on to Perrin, readers of the book will have noticed one big difference with Perrin's story in the TV series, and that's that Perrin in the TV show has a wife, but not for long, because Perrin's big thing in the first few episodes is the dead wife trope. And I've used Comic Sans for this because I think that Comic Sans is the perfect analogy for the presence of the dead wife trope in the TV series. It's gaudy, it's awful, and it cheapens everything around it. Totally unnecessary to the plot to introduce this female character and then kill her off in the first episode. This is one of the most well-known and most disparaged tropes in fiction, for good reason. It's often called the Lost Lenore trope, and it's using a female character as a love interest just to kill her off to further the plot of the male character. I think it was really unnecessary for Perrin's character arc. So Perrin's story in the books is in many ways one about overcoming tragedy, but it didn't need to start with a dead wife trope, and I think it's definitely the worse for it. We're now seeing a character built on having a dead wife rather than actually seeing the person underneath. So I think this, both for the tropiness and the effect on Perrin's character, is definitely worse than the books. So moving on to Mat. Mat, I think, actually has the biggest change to his character from the books. And surprisingly, I think they're actually good changes. From what I've seen, most book readers have come to this conclusion as well. So, like most people, Mat eventually becomes my favourite character in the books. But in the early books, he's portrayed as a kind of joker, a practical joker, sort of like a fantasy Bart Simpson. And he doesn't have much depth beyond this. In the TV show, they've portrayed Mat as more of a thief, but we see that he's only doing this because he's poor and he's had a kind of tough family life, and ultimately his thievery or his less palatable behavioral characteristics are inspired by a desire to protect his family and to provide for his sisters, where his parents have failed to do this. So I think this is a definite improvement in Mat's character. We're given a character that we're able to relate to from the start, even though stealing is objectively probably worse than practical joking. We can relate to and empathize a lot more with Mat in the TV show than we could in the early books. So I think this is a definite improvement to his character arc, and yeah, quite happy with how Mat has been written in the TV show. So overall, I think the plot and progression of the plot has been quite good, particularly in regards to the character arcs. So we have a little bit more character development from the female characters, Egwene and Nynaeve, at the expense of Rand and to a lesser extent Perrin. But overall, I think they've done a good job with the character arcs. For the plot, I give a 7 out of 10, and this is mostly due to the inclusion of a bunch of random fantasy tropes that didn't need to be there. So we had the dead wife trope, the blind seer trope, and the classism at the White Tower that really didn't serve to advance the story at all by including them. It feels like it was kind of an artistic embellishment on behalf of the writers, but I think in the end, Robert Jordan is a better world builder than these TV writers, and they'd be better off just sticking with what he's already written in terms of world building and focus instead on what they've done quite well, which is character development, which, as I mentioned earlier, Jordan wasn't particularly good at in his writing. So we come now to the music from the TV series. So there's two types of music to talk about here. Firstly, the theme music and the underscoring. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this, but I think the theme is quite nice. It lacks a bit of the character of some other theme tunes, such as the Game of Thrones tune, obviously, and also, say, His Dark Materials tune, which was actually written by the same composer. But overall, decent theme that I think captures the character of the series. The underscoring as well, I think, was pretty good, helped to convey the mood of different scenes, such as what you're hearing right now, which was for the Beltane Winter's Night scene where they were sending the lanterns up the river. And the scoring for the action sequences and suspenseful sequences I thought was also really good in capturing the mood of those scenes. But what I want to talk mainly about in this section is the diegetic or setting music. So this refers normally to music that's seen to be coming from the world itself. So for example, a live band in the show playing. I'm going to including this music that's clearly kind of representative of an area. So for example, when we're first introduced to Emmons Field, the town that the main characters come from, we hear this music playing. So to me, this music is saying, "Okay, Corral," not "One Spring In." There's a definite Americana bent to the music. We hear this again in the scene where the villagers are riding and Matt starts singing this song about Manetheren, or Manetheren as they say in the show. So I think these are really cool tracks, but it's a style of music which I think is kind of out of place in this setting. I don't necessarily blame the composer for this, because I think that they probably got a brief saying, write something that sounds American, but I think this was a pretty terrible artistic decision. I'm guessing this was probably done to sort of evoke the feeling of rural, hardworking, simple life for American audiences, but for the other 95% of the world's population that don't come from the US, this has just kind of hoisted us out of the fantasy setting and thrown us into the middle of "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" or something along those lines. So the other example of Two Rivers music that we get in the show is at the Beltane Festival, where we have this band who are beginning to play for the dancing. I thought this looked really good. We had a good kind of medieval or medieval-ish Ren Fair looking band. We have what looks like a Samodicon maybe, or some kind of simple upright bass, a Baroque guitar, a double reed or pipe of some sort, maybe a shawm, and two frame drums, one played with the hands, one played with the beater. So this looked perfect for kind of what you'd expect of medieval music or early folk music. But then the music starts and there's a banjo. So it sounds like they're at a Mumford & Sons concert here, not at a village dance in the Wheel of Time. And weirdly, we don't see any banjo in the band. I guess someone rightly thought, no, that would be weird if there's a banjo there. It looks totally out of place. But it also sounds totally out of place. And the fact that it's not there in the visuals just mean that, as well as having this incongruous banjo sound in the middle of the village dance, we have a kind of sensory conflict between what we're hearing from the music and what we're seeing in the scene. So yeah, I think the inclusion of the banjos here really spoiled the music. Robert Jordan mentions a few instruments in his writings, the main one being a bittern, which is actually a kind of bird, but what he probably meant was a cittern, which matches his descriptions of the bittern instrument. So you see here on the left a medieval cittern, and on the right a more modern cittern, which is kind of grown out of the bouzouki. And the cittern is really, in my unbiased opinion, a god among instruments. You can play pretty much anything on this instrument and it's going to sound instantly like medieval or fantasy tavern music. I think this would have fit a lot better in these scenes than a banjo. If you want to hear an Americana type feel done well with these kind of instruments, I recommend this Lord of the Rings Online track linked here. So the last bit of diegetic music we get in the show is this scene of Tom playing his song on guitar. I thought this was fine. So Tom in the books plays harp as his kind of main highbrow instrument, and when he's playing in taverns and the like, he tends to more often play the flute. But the flute doesn't really lend itself to an accompaniment instrument to a song in the real world because you can't sing and play at the same time. I think it's fine that he plays the guitar here rather than a flute, and it gives the actor a chance to really get into the performance and into the character of Tom by being able to play the instrument and give the performance in real life. And they managed to dig into the backstory of the dragon and some of the emotion behind the story in the lyrics, which I thought was really nice. So overall for the music, I think the scoring and theme were good, but I think the Two Rivers music just totally missed the mark with the Americana feel. For me, it was 100% immersion breaking. It sounded totally wrong, didn't fit the region at all, didn't fit the theme at all. Banjos have no place in fantasy or medieval era. Just please, no more banjos. So overall, I'm going to give the music a 3 out of 10, basically like a 6 or 7 out of 10 for the underscoring, and something like a 0 or 1 for the Two Rivers music. I hope that we're done with the Americana at this point and that we can get some more fitting music for the rest of the series. So overall, between the setting, plot and music, I'm going to give the first 3 episodes a 7 out of 10. I think the main deficiencies so far were the immersion breaking music and the inclusion of some random fantasy tropes that didn't need to be there. Robert Jordan's original story was pretty good. It could use more character development, but didn't really need blind seers or dead wives to move things along or make the story any better fit for TV than it already would have been without them. But overall, I'm really enjoying the TV show so far. I would definitely recommend it to both people who've read the books and people who haven't. And I'm looking forward to seeing more episodes. Let me know what you think, if you've noticed anything else that I missed in the review, or if you think I've committed the cardinal sin of being wrong on the internet, feel free to let me know in the comments.